I think in every iteration of the universe, Warren Buffett is a multi-millionaire. I'm not debating that. I'm not saying he's lucky, but to get to that level of, the multi-billions, I think there's always some luck involved, right? One wrong move somewhere 50 years ago, and maybe he only ends up with $200 million, and he's still famous, but not as famous.
Hey, Journeyers. Welcome to the Journey to Launch podcast. I'm so excited to have today's guest. His name is Nick Maggiulli. He is the author of the bestseller, Just Keep Buying, Proven Ways to Save Money and Build Your Wealth. He was actually on the podcast on episode 271 a bit back, so you can check out that episode. And he's the author of the new book, The Wealth Ladder, Proven Strategies for Every Step for Your Financial Life. Of course, he also writes weekly for Of Dollars and Data, which is a very popular blog in the personal finance and finance space, which focuses on the intersection of data and personal finance. Welcome back to the show, Nick.
Thank you for having me back on. I truly appreciate it.
Yeah. So, Nick, before I pressed record, you just said, you work still full time. You have a job.
I still have a full time. Yeah.
Full-time job, and you run a blog that's successful. You write weekly on that, and I think you're very active on Twitter, or X as they call it now, right? Like, I feel like your stuff pops up a lot for me. And I mean, you're writing, or you wrote your second book. I think that's very interesting as someone who, Journey to Launch is my full-time thing now, but I can't imagine, well, I did at one point have a full-time job and then like things on the side. But before we hop into your amazing content and what you can teach us about wealth, I'd love to know how you balance that all, the full-time job, the writing, and all these different pursuits you seem to have. How do you do that?
It's very simple. I just stay in my lane. Like, all I do is I write one blog post a week. I don't do a bunch of other posts and a bunch of other stuff. With the Twitter stuff, I pre-schedule all that stuff. Like, I can't sit there and be live and doing it all the time. So a lot of that's pre-scheduled, but I literally just write one blog post a week, and I've been doing it for almost 9 years now. At the end of this year will be 9 years. I started in 2017. So I just do something that doesn't sound that extraordinary, like one blog post. Like most people, it'll get a couple thousand views, nothing extraordinary, but you do that every single week. You learn about a new topic every week, and eventually that information together can eventually become a book. Like, Just Keep Buying is, my first book was like 60-70% blog material. Obviously, I repurposed it. I polished it up. I went with an editor. Like, it's a much higher quality product than my blog, but like, that's what it was. It was just week after week of doing that. And so I usually spend either Saturday or Sunday, I spend, 6 to 10 hours just writing a blog post every single week. And I just do that every week, and that's it. So I know it sounds like, oh my gosh, you have all this stuff, but that's all I do. I don't do podcasts. I come on as a guest, obviously, but like, I don't have time to do podcasts, YouTube, all this other stuff that all these other people do. I just can't do it. I can't handle it. I have to just do my one blog post a week, and that informs everything else.
Yeah, well, I think that's actually a great, just like, terms of mediums to get your content out there. If as a thought leader, or you want to build something, as a lot of people listening may want to do, and it could be any subject matter. It doesn't have to be finance, but something you're interested in. I think I know podcasts and video and social media is like the thing that seems what everyone is doing now, but I do think there's still a space for the old form of just writing and even blogs, and it may not be as eye-catching, or it's more long form, but there's still a space for that. And then I'd be remiss not to ask, just because as a mom myself, knowing it takes up so much time of my life and day, how you balance family. Hope that's not too much prying, but I just know that some people who are like watching and listening are like, well, like, like whether they have a partner or they have kids, like how do they balance doing all those things too? So do you have that too in your life, or is that not necessarily something that impacts what you do?
Yeah, so no kids yet. I do have a fiance, and well, by the time this comes out, my wife and everything, we're already planning everything. So but no, so that's another thing that people don't talk about. You see all these content creators, do all this stuff. It's like, yeah, they don't have a partner most of the time, or if they do have a partner, they don't have kids. So I think that's another thing that people don't talk about. And those that are doing a lot of content and that have kids generally, and I'm not going to say this is true across the board, but if it's a man, for example, their spouse does basically all the child rearing, and they don't have to, I'm not saying they don't do anything, but they just don't have to deal with it in the same way. So I definitely am going to, once I start having kids, I'm going to slow down with the blog. I don't know if I'm going to be doing it once a week. After 9 years, I think I can give myself a break. Maybe I'll do it once a month or something, or only if I find a really good topic. It might be ad hoc, but I'll definitely slow down, but that's a big piece of this. But when I started, I was 27, so I wasn't really in the, starting my family yet age. And so now I'm, 35. So now I'm like, okay, I'm moving into that direction now. And so it's going to slow down. That's another piece of this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting because I just like finances, right? Where we're talking about like if we were trying to compare people's starting points or what they have going for them and the ability to do certain things that we're going to talk about, right? In this episode, it's like even though you feel like you're prying in someone's personal life about asking about partners and kids, but it does impact the way you show up, whether it is how you earn income, how much you need to spend, and just how much energy you have to do things that can earn you money. So I do think it's important to, if people are open to sharing it, because it makes other people understand kind of, all right, here is the full picture of why this person may be able to do this in a way that I can't yet or right now.
Yeah, I know very few content creators that are really big full time and have a family that's like, especially young kids. By the time it's like, oh yeah, I have kids, but like they're off in college now. Like they have that kind of move, that free time. So it's very tough to put in that level of dedication and effort and still be there for your family. I think that's just generally true. That's nothing to do with content. I think we hear this in the professional world everywhere. And so if you're working 80, 100-hour weeks, it's really tough to do that with a family and really support them and be there for them in the way that you probably want to be.
Right. Now, I want to talk a bit now about your new book and a lot of like the concepts that you have in it, because I think it's pretty interesting and a great way to present things that we talk about all the time in hopefully a new way that get people excited or interested in looking at their finances. So you have something called the Wealth Ladder. The name of the book is The Wealth Ladder, and there's 6 levels to the ladder. So can we talk about what the wealth ladder is, and then we'll get into the levels of them and how people can identify where they are?
Of course, yeah. So the wealth ladder is just a new framework for thinking about your finances. And I mean that in terms of you think about how you make spending decisions, how you make income decisions, how you make investment decisions. And the main idea is that every wealth level, and we'll talk about the wealth levels in a second here, each wealth level you can have a different strategy to move upward on the wealth ladder, right? And so there are 6 wealth levels. Each wealth level is as a factor of 10 above the prior one. So what I mean by that, it's just based on your net worth, right? Your total assets minus your total liabilities, right? So if your net worth is less than $10,000, I consider that level 1. Even if you have negative net worth, anything less than $10,000 is level 1. Level 2, that's going to be someone with $10,000 to $100,000, right? Level 3, that's someone with $100,000 to $1 million in net worth. Level 4, $1 million to $10 million, and then it goes upward from there. I think, vast majority of people, like 98% of the United States, is in levels 1 to 4. Very few people make it to level 5, which is 10 million to 100 million, etc. The reason why I came up with this framework is once you know one level, you can figure out all the rest, because they're all just factors of 10. So if you know, hey, level 2 is 10,000 to 100,000, then level 3 is just 100,000 to $1 million, right? And I actually like this division because I think it shows, like, in terms of spending money and things like that, it really does take a 10x jump in wealth to really fundamentally change your lifestyle. And so I'll always pose this question to somebody, like, imagine, you have a net worth of $1 million. How much is $10,000 going to change your life? It's not at all. Like, yes, it would be nice. You can go on a vacation or two. Like, there's some cool things you can do, but like your day-to-day lifestyle is identical as if you didn't have that $10,000. I think the same thing is true. Someone has $100,000, you give them an extra $1,000. It's not going to really move the needle. It's nice. It's a buffer. But I think that's where we start to think about the value of money and the utility of money changes over time, and that's what the wealth ladder kind of takes into account. And I can get into the spending, income, investment decisions, but that's kind of a high-level overview of what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to want to get into all those things because as you were talking, I do want to understand, and maybe we do get into this or you get into it. Does it matter? I know the way you're describing wealth in these levels are your assets minus your liabilities. It's not based on income. And do you make is there a difference or more weighted value placed on the type of assets, like a more liquid asset than not? Because, I know a lot of people, even including myself, where a lot of a lot of my current assets are in like the value of my home or retirement account versus, in taxable accounts and other things that I can easily access. So how do you look at or break down the type of assets?
So the answer is yes and no. And so when I say in terms of the wealth ladder overall, I don't care about the composition of assets. Like what your wealth level is roughly based on your total assets, right? Even if like, well, I have a lot of that in a retirement account. Oh, I have a lot of that in home equity. That's fine in terms of, but that's where your wealth level is going to be, is based on that. However, when it comes to how you spend money, I think you have to use liquid net worth. And the reason why is like, I can't, let's say I have $1,000 in my bank account, but I have a home with $500,000 in equity. I can't use that $500,000 and be like, okay, it's my piggy bank. I mean, in theory, you can pull out a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, and start doing stuff like that, but I'm not recommending any of that. I'm just saying, in general, like your retirement money's for retirement, your home equity is there, and maybe one day you can cash it out, but for the most part, when it comes to spending, you have to use your liquid net worth. And I think that's a better metric, and it's a little bit more conservative. And I can get into that. I have a rule I use for thinking about spending in the wealth ladder as well. So,
and I'm smiling because I definitely felt that difference applying for, just as an exercise to see what would happen. My oldest son, he's going into 6th grade next school year. So I was like, okay, let's look at some independent, / private schools and just kind of see, and we had to submit all the paperwork and our assets and all that. And, I feel like they looked at everything. They didn't look at like liquid assets of like how much we could actually spend with cash flow. They looked at the assets that we had on paper, but I'm like, I'm not going to liquidate my retirement account or take out a loan to do this. But it was just so interesting to see like when they came back to me. And again, I know that we're in a very privileged position to have assets at all, compared to people who really need some financial aid. But I thought it was just so interesting when they came back. Some schools came back and were like, oh, you no aid, you pay full $65,000 a year. And I'm like, did I put an extra zero somewhere in my income? Because that, like, on a cash flow basis, that would not at all be possible. So
yeah, it's the old joke, house rich, cash poor type thing. If you have it in housing or whatever, you could have retirement account rich, cash poor. It's the same type of thing. And so I think overall, when you actually look at wealth, I think you need to include it when thinking about the wealth ladder and decision making. But in terms of spending, you have to think about your liquid net worth. And that rule I talk about is called the 0.01% rule, or you could even call it the 1/10,000th rule. You basically take your net worth, you divide by 10,000, and that number is like the marginal amount you can spend extra on things. And so I come up with like each wealth level has like a level of like spending freedom. So like level 1, you don't really have spending freedom. You don't have a lot of money. By level 2, I grant what I call grocery freedom. So when you go to the grocery store, you can kind of stop looking. Once you have $10,000 in wealth, you can kind of stop looking at like the prices on things at the grocery store. You still kind of have to at that level, but once you get to like the end of level 2, by the time you have $100,000 in wealth, the difference between, the cage-free eggs and the standard eggs or whatever is so small, it's not going to really make a difference. So if you have $100,000 in wealth, right, divide by 10,000, that's a $10 extra marginal spending you can spend. And it wouldn't really impact your finances. That's the whole idea behind this rule, is like, how much can I spend extra on some thing without impacting my finances? And so where that number comes from, it's very simple. Just imagine that your wealth grows by like, I'm going to use a very conservative estimate, 4% a year roughly. That's roughly 0.01% a day. Like it's like actually 3.7%, but I don't want to get into all the math here. It's just 4% a year is about 0.01% a day. That means every single day you could spend 0.01% of your wealth and your wealth would remain the same. So you can kind of treat yourself a little bit. But where do you get to treat yourself? It depends, right? So I said level 2 is grocery freedom. You can probably treat yourself at the grocery store. Level 3, I call that restaurant freedom. That's 100,000 to $1 million in wealth. When you go to restaurants, you can kind of upgrade, get nicer things. Oh, do I want to get the $25 burger or the $35 salmon? Like, that doesn't really matter once you start to get into level 3, right? And then you can go from there, right? And so every wealth level has a spending, a level of spending freedom, and is based on this rule, 0.01%. So if you take your wealth and you divide by, 10,000 or multiply by 0.01, or actually 0.0001, you get the 0.01%, you get to that number, which is how much more can I spend. And this is where I say use your liquid net worth, by the way. This is not supposed to use your overall net worth to do
right.
this.
So you're saying for that, use your liquid, not your
Overall net worth, yeah, because you can't spend your
Right.
home equity, you can't spend your retirement accounts, and that's conservative. Technically, you could spend based on that, but like I really think if you want to be extra conservative, ensure that your spending doesn't really harm your financial progress. That's where you go to is you use liquid net worth. But I'm open for either. I've kind of debating still. I kind of want to hear people's reactions to it too as
Yeah.
they use the rule.
So it sounds like people should like do the this net worth calculation like two ways based on like liquid net worth and then the overall, including all the assets they have net worth. Is that what you're saying? So you can kind of figure
Yeah.
out the spending, additional spending, freedom you have versus kind of where you land in other areas.
Yeah, and the thing is, you don't need to get it down to the penny. Like most
Yeah.
people know, like, oh, do I have $1 million to $10 million? Like people are gonna know like where they are, just like they have some rough idea of where their assets are, where their liabilities are. You don't need to get this down to the penny. This is not a science. This is an art. It's just like, hey, if I have somewhere between $10,000 and $100,000 in wealth, I'm probably in the grocery freedom stage, right? I can probably relax when I go to the grocery store. I don't need to, pinch pennies every single time. If you want to, you can. It's up to you. You can spend your money however you want. I'm just saying I'm trying to find a way that allows people to spend more money as they build wealth. And I think wealth is not always the case, right? For trust fund kids and people that hit the lotto, it's not a show of discipline. But for most people, having wealth shows that you've had some financial discipline in the past. I don't think that's true of everybody, but for most people, it's like, hey, look, I had to save this money, right? Most people in life aren't handed anything, so they have to go and work and save. And so by saying, hey, look, I've saved up $100,000 in wealth. Okay, now when you go to a restaurant, you can spend a little bit more, right? It's just a framework that I'm trying to help people with spending guilt because there's so much spending guilt out there, and I think this is a way that allows for some lifestyle creep without without going overboard, basically.
And let's talk a bit about income. I know that that's not necessarily, we're not looking at that for our formula, but it's very real for people in terms of how much they feel they can actually spend, especially if maybe you have inconsistent income and income that fluctuates, or you just even like the thought of your assets, your net worth, like that's one thing, especially depending on how old you are and how much working years you have left until you can access maybe the more protected accounts and things where you don't have a mortgage anymore, so you paid off the mortgage and then your need for expenses goes down. But how does one think about the working years and figuring out how to spend based on their income while they're still trying to get up the ladder, right? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think the main thing, what I like to think about with income is I don't like coming up with like a fixed spending rule. This is something I talked about in Just Keep Buying because it's like spending is a lot of times most people have to just spend like what they need to survive, like the necessities. You need to pay rent or have a mortgage, right? You need to pay for food. Like I can't be like, oh, just spend less. Like it's very difficult to do that for a lot of people. So you have some sort of necessity spending. The idea behind the wealth ladder and using your wealth is like, what's that little extra kind of like an upgrade, right? Like your income's going to pay for all your stuff. The wealth is what pays for that little upgrade, that little extra thing. So whether that's at the grocery store or a restaurant or when you're traveling, etc., right? And so the thing I like to think about when it comes to like income in this scenario is like, if you have more income than you have spending, then you're saving money, and that's great. You can still use the wealth ladder for that marginal spend, right, which is on a day-to-day basis. The other thing I like to think about is like I want people to get out of thinking about income rules like, oh, I can only spend 10% or 20% or I need to save 20% of my income. I want them to think about like, okay, I'm just spending what I'm spending and like how can I raise my income? Because what I've found and what the data shows, and it'll show in the book, it's like for the most part, people higher on the wealth ladder just earn so much more than people lower on the wealth ladder. This is not a spending issue. It's not like they're like, oh, I just spend better. People in level 4 and level 5 don't spend money much better than people in level 2 and level 3. They just have so much more income. And so I think we focus so much on spending. I'm not saying spending doesn't matter. I think spending matters a lot, especially in level 1. But once you start to build some wealth and get out of that, I need your mindset to get out of like, oh, I need to be spending less and more to like, I need to be earning more. And that's a very different thing. And if you actually look at what's the most correlated thing with long-term wealth, it's someone's income. So it's not something that's going to build overnight. It takes a long time, but it's one of those things where like that's the main focus. And I think people focus a little bit too much on spending to their detriment.
Yeah, I definitely I talk about this in my work too, and like in my book where the driving force to reaching your goals is income, right? Even if you can choose to spend less if you want, but ultimately that is not what's going, unless you're super, super frugal, which, a lot of people, especially nowadays with inflation and just like the cost of things. And if you have a family and a partner, I just think it's harder to be as frugal as my parents were. Like, there's a lot of options. There's just a lot. And so ideally, people need to focus on the income. I just think for personal finance reasons, a quicker and easier thing to tell people is to cut back, because like you said, just like in your level one, it was like my explorer level of my journey or stages is the very beginning. And like to really like almost stop and get out of that stage quicker, especially if you don't necessarily have an income problem. Maybe you do earn enough. You might have an expense problem where you are spending above what you're bringing in. And so you're going to need to look at that in the meantime while you work on the habits and mindset and all the other things that will help you then be able to manage the more income you will bring in. But, I do think that is something where the person who does not care about personal finance does not necessarily want to listen to podcasts or read books about this. They're just like, oh, this person's just going to tell me I can't spend. And, here we go again. Like, they want to live their lives. And I think trying to connect them with, it's more about mindful spending. And yeah, maybe there's things you just cut out, not just for the sake of it, but to get to where you want to be. And then ultimately you decide where you want to spend. And talking and approaching it that way with personal finance, I think hopefully is better. But I can see why it turns so many people off who are just like, I just want to spend my money.
No, I completely understand. I do think there's a large piece of this. It's like there's a balance between like, okay, obviously we want you to like enjoy your life, like you only live once. It's not like one of these things where like you should just live like a hermit all the time. At the same time, you want to kind of have that a little bit more freedom. And so the thing I try to tell people is like, just get out of level one. I think just getting to like $10,000, you don't have to have even $10,000 purely in cash in your bank account, but like even having a few $1,000s. You hear these stories about during COVID when people got these stimulus checks, it changed some people's lives, even though it wasn't like a ton of money. It's like, oh my gosh, I can breathe. I don't have to worry about my exact next paycheck to put food on the table. So like that little buffer can mean so much in level one. So like, I'm like, hey, the quote I use is like, atypical results require atypical actions. And I think that's only true in level one. So the only time I'm ever going to say like, hey, if you're in a really dark place financially, you got to really analyze everything until you get out of it. Then once you're like level two, you can take your foot off the gas and you can relax a bit more. And I'm not as spending I don't think you have to be as spending conscious once you kind of have demonstrated some financial discipline. I just think it's hard. Like some people can be very deeply in debt. It's like, I'm $100,000 in debt. How do I get out of that? That's when you talk about income, when you talk about a lot of things, of course, spending is going to help, but there's got to be a different discussion there.
Right. And I mean, one of the other things that we kind of touched upon when we talked about family a bit and kind of life stages that we go through is the like evolution of your financial strategy as you go through major life changes. Right. And so, I don't know, how would you give someone advice whether they're going through a career change, maybe they're in their early 20s, they're just getting into the job market, or they're in a career change, or they have, a family and someone else they're taking care of. How do they look at or approach their finances differently?
So if you're taking care of someone, you have a lot of liabilities. I mean, the hard thing, at least from like an investment standpoint, you can't take a ton of risk with your money. Like really the only long-term or medium-term solution is to try to find ways to build income. Now, what does that mean? Skills, education, is it free education? Is it like a night class? I don't want you to spend too much money to do this because I don't think that's always the solution. You could be spending a lot of money and then you're worse off than where you started, right? So it's like, what are the skills that someone will pay for, and try and find those, or make your own business and do something. Of course, like once again, this should be a low cost thing. You shouldn't be like, oh, I'm going to go rent a space and get all these expenses. Like you could end up much deeper in a hole than where you started. So I know it's not a great solution. And once again, if you're in a tough place, like the answer, unfortunately, is like you have to do something different, right? Because what you've been doing isn't working in that sense. And there's other constraints. There's other mouths you need to feed possibly. And so it's like, how do you get out of that? You have to be very, pragmatic in how you approach a lot of this stuff. So
what advice would you give for someone who is like, all right, I do want to earn more. I know I need to earn more. I'm at, a level in which I know it's definitely not a spending thing or issue. It's income issue. How or what advice would you give, right? Like whether it is to pursue their current job and move up the rung there, or start a side business, or both. Like how, and I know that's very general because everyone has different skills or like motivation, but what kind of, I guess, insight or help would you tell someone in terms of career growth?
Yeah, so there's usually a couple. I mean, if you really think about like the highest paying like professions out there, they all have one of a few things in common. You either need to have some like really advanced degree, so that's like doctor, lawyer. I usually don't recommend that as the first choice because you have to go deeply in debt. And there's a lot of things. I'm not saying that that's not a good choice, but it could be a much longer journey. That's probably the longest and most difficult one. Second one is sales. If you can sell stuff, like you can eventually get one sales job, transition to another sales job. Of course, not everyone has that skill. I don't think I'm the best salesman, even though I'm trying to sell books and all this stuff. I'm not the best salesman. I try to be a good writer, but like I think, okay, sales, can you do that? Because if you can sell stuff, you can earn commissions. And once again, you just start selling bigger and bigger stuff. Maybe you start selling, at one job, but then eventually you're like, oh, now I'm selling, you're a real estate agent. Now you're kind of selling real estate in a way. And so you're earning a commission there, right? That's another sales job if you think about it. You got to be good with people. If you can't do that, what about something technical? I know there's people out there like just knowing Microsoft Excel very well, like paying for a little course and just doing that. I know there's jobs out there that'll pay you 50 grand a year to go to if you know Excel very well. And I will tell you, there are a lot of people that do not know Microsoft Excel. And so just having that skill and demonstrating that, you can probably get a job at an accounting firm or something like that. Now, of course, I'm not the expert on that. Do some research there as well. But like these things are happening. So if you're not going to do sales, do something with technical stuff. If you're not going to do technical stuff, you can try an education. The last option is like, are you good at organizing people and like moving in the right direction with the business? Of course, that's also very difficult to say like, oh, let's just start a business and I'm really good at being a manager and managing a group of people to get something done. If you can do that in a way that produces a lot of value that people are willing to pay for, great. But once again, that's also a difficult thing. But those are the people that make a lot of money. They're very technical. They're good at sales. They have a lot of education, or they're some sort of business owner, right? So those are the four big ones. I mean, there are others. Obviously there's like, entertainers, athletes. There's all these other things, but I'm just going to assume most people aren't going to do that. But you can see like there's a couple big areas where people earn a lot. And so if you're like, okay, what can I do to get into one of those areas? And how can I basically, do that to increase my income? That's the goal.
Right. Now, what advice can you lend to like the creative side of because I know the technical side, like we talked about, which knowing Excel or getting advanced degrees and like which is great, right? And I know there are a lot of creatives where maybe they don't think that is their strong suit, being more technical, but they are, whether it's athleticism and or creativity and just other things, or writing, where it's not necessarily a proven path to make money. You see some people break through and make a lot of money doing those things, but it's like the average person doesn't make that much money doing it, but there is a passion for it. What advice would you kind of give to that person at they're pursuing, they want to keep going up the wealth ladder and get to the next level, but there is a cap maybe on the kind of income they can make in that specific career, but that's what they enjoy doing?
Then I would look at it as like that has to be like a side hustle thing. Like that's kind of how I didn't make money for the first 3 years I was writing. I've been writing for 9 years now. I didn't actually start making any money until year 4. So I'm not saying that that's what you should do. Like obviously, like I had a full-time job that whole time, so I had the luxury of not having to earn income. But that's an example of like, okay, if you really love it, like it should just be easy for you to keep doing. And if you keep doing it, there's a possibility that it could start generating income for you. That's obviously not guaranteed. And you're right. It's a long tail, especially with athletes, with content creators, financial content creators. Like you're in the top 0.1% of financial content creators, right? Like just by, having this podcast at this size, like it's very rare to get there. Right. And so I think it's something to kind of keep in mind is like, it's very tough. It's a long game, but if you love it, like keep putting stuff out there, get feedback, improve your product, like, and just keep doing it. Like, and I don't have a guarantee there. Once again, it is a very difficult thing to do. I think you just have to keep doing it for a long time and see what happens, and just follow like what's working, what's not working. Like you're going to get feedback. I think what I see most people do is they just give up too quickly. And I know that's always the cliche thing to say, but like, I don't know that many people. There are some out there that have been doing it for a long time, just haven't had any success. But like, and I mean a long time. You got to do, I'm talking at least 5+ years. Very few people. I've seen people start blogs within 2 months they stop. You know, I've seen people start a podcast within less, most of them die within 20 episodes, right? So it's very rare to have 271, 400. Like, if you think about the number of episodes you start to get to, it's like very few people make it there. So I think it takes a lot of work, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, no, I think, to me that applies. It's a schooling, right? To certain levels, even the technical aspects of things, where you're trying to make it to this level, that a professional level, that, you know, if it was easy, everyone would be at that level. The reason why there are less people as you go up or make as much money is because there is a longevity and consistency and persistency that you have to achieve that. And I think for most people, it's deciding what you're going to pursue and sticking with it, and keep going.
Yeah, I agree. I think most people can get into level 3 and possibly level 4 with hard work. I think there's some luck involved, obviously. Like, if there's always luck involved in everyone's life. I think getting to level 5 and 6, which once again, level 5 is 10 million to 100 million, level 6, 100 million plus, requires even more luck. I'm not saying that all those people are lucky, definitely not, but you know, I could see a world where I think in every iteration of the universe, Warren Buffett is a multi-millionaire. I'm not debating that. I'm not saying he's lucky, but to get to that level of, you know, the multi-billions, I think there's always some luck involved, right? One wrong move somewhere 50 years ago, and maybe he only ends up with $200 million, and he's still famous, but not as famous. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of luck involved with this stuff, but I think just through hard work, a lot of people can get to level 3, which is 100,000 to a million, which is like the American middle class. That's like your bread and butter American middle class. 40% of U.S. households are in that level, and I think it's a level that's very attainable through hard work and persistence, you know?
What would you say is the best way for someone to build up to 100,000? Like that, you know, the bottom level of that's level 2 or 3? Level 3.
That's the top of level 2, bottom of level 3, yeah.
Okay. So what would you say is the best way for someone to get there? You know, I know there's different strategies or ways, right? It could be through owning a home, which is kind of more of it's not as liquid of an asset, or, you know, it's investing, but if you're investing long term, that's, you know, might take a little bit of time. What for you feel like, based on your research or like all the readers or people you've come across, have they gotten to that like level that you think everyone can get to? What's been like, not the proven path, but the path you like?
So there's a few things I would think of. I think a lot of these people have gotten some form of education. Now, once again, that does not necessarily mean you have to have a law degree or a medical degree or even a bachelor's degree from a college. But I think there's some form of education, whether that means you're getting a formal college degree or you're getting, you know, there's a lot of blue collar jobs out there, a lot of technical jobs. You know, you're a plumber, you're an electrician. I think a lot of those jobs, those types of technical degrees can also get you into level 3 very easily. But it takes time. Like, I think the main thing is like increase your income. It's going to be very difficult to get there on a typical, you know, on like a minimum wage salary. It's just the spending and the income, just they basically match each other, sometimes not even, and you're actually spending more than you're earning, and you just can't build wealth, right? So you have to get some sort of education or some sort of skill that's going to get you that kind of the ball rolling, so you're saving money, and then yes, invest that money over time. And so between the investing, you know, just keep buying, which is like my whole thing here. It's like between just keep buying and, you know, and increasing your income, those two things should over time get you into level 3. And I fundamentally believe that. Like, it obviously takes time, and every person's journey is going to be different. It's not going to happen overnight. And like, that's the thing we need to emphasize, especially if you came from like, your family came from level 1, level 2, you guys didn't really come from money. Like, this is something that's going to take time, because you have to learn. Like, you don't know what you don't know. And I talk about this in the book. Like, I was very fortunate. I got into Stanford University. I had a full ride, like just aid, you know, because my family didn't make much money. So I was very fortunate to be there. And my friend comes to me and he says, hey, have you applied for internships? I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like my sophomore year, and apparently in the winter we're supposed to apply for internships for like that summer before junior year. I didn't even know that this was happening. And he's like, yeah, dude, everyone's been applying. Like, you don't. I was like, I had no clue. He's like, people know about this. People from certain, you know, wealth levels know about this because their parents tell them about it, or their parents went through that recruiting cycle, right? And so if you're not exposed to it, you're going to walk through life and have no idea what the options are. So a lot of time, it's just you going out there, learning, talking to people, and just getting information so you can make better decisions. And I was very fortunate that my friend came up to me and told me to apply for that internship, because that made me realize, by the way, I got rejected from everything, so I didn't get any sort of internship that summer. But it made me think, oh my gosh, I need to start doing research work or something so I can build my resume so in the future I don't get rejected, right? So it pushed me to actually make different decisions that I probably wouldn't have made otherwise.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because I mean I agree wholeheartedly with that in terms of there are all the even just with me discovering the fire movement, where it's like there are things that are happening where it's like the norm, people are doing it, you have no even clue that it's an option. But for someone, it's just what they do. It is a resource or just a nugget of information that is helping them live a different type of life. And I was just always amazed when every time I learned something new or find out someone is doing something I didn't know was even possible, I'm just like, wow, like the information and is so important, and access and awareness. And I do feel like part of it is it's not necessarily luck. That's why I think mindset goes so much into this, because I do believe like people can be shown things or can be told things and they're not ready to receive the information for whatever reason, maybe stage of life, maybe they're tired, maybe they just, it's just they don't understand it. But I do think that's partly a mindset thing, because not that you have to like jump on every opportunity that comes across, your eyes, but I do think there's something to be said for like being interested in something or seeing something or hearing like a question being like, did you do this? And not just saying no and like just like continuing on, but like, wait, should I do this? And researching and thinking like, you know what, I deserve to have a shot too, and figuring out how to get to that place. And like I always say, that's how I've been able to evolve to where I am today, is because I've always just been curious, and I always thought like, why can't I also do this thing this other person is doing?
Yeah, exactly. I think exposure is a lot of it. And once again, I was lucky in the sense like I happened to, yes, I had maybe the right mindset, but I happened to be around people that knew about this stuff. If I wasn't there, I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have started trying to build my resume in my sophomore year, which eventually helped me get a full-time job, a year later I'm doing recruiting, in my junior year. So it's like, it's all this type of stuff that you don't know about. And as you start to learn about it, it just becomes very interesting. So
yeah, and the people that you are around, for them, it was normal. It's kind of like everyone's doing this. Like, why are you not doing this either? And so it makes you be like, oh, okay. So I know you write a lot or you interact a lot with your readers, and there's like just been a lot happening in the financial markets and space. What's like something that you wrote about recently, or that, and I know by the time this comes out, it may not be as recent, but just something that's been interesting, or you find that you get feedback from that you're like, oh, people are interested in this topic that you think would be interesting to share here.
I think what's interesting, so I just wrote this post recently called Give Now, Not Later. And this idea is, of course, it's not written for most people. It's written for like an older generation that's sitting on a lot of wealth. And the idea is like, there's a lot of people, when you ask people like, okay, if you could get an inheritance, like, would you rather have a lower amount earlier in time or a larger amount later? And almost overwhelmingly, people would take the much lower amount earlier in time, because it can really fundamentally change kind of what's happening in your life at a given point in time. Like having, and the numbers I use, like if you could have, I remember this is a very high inheritance, 250K at 30, $500,000 at 40, or $1 million at 50. And by the way, that's like a 7%, real return over that period. If you took 250K and grew it by 7% a year, you'd have 500 at 40, and then in 10 years, and then grew that by 7% a year, you'd have $1 million in another 10 years, right? So I asked them this, and most people, overwhelmingly, like 70% of people, say they want the 250K at 30, because they think you can really change your life, you can make better decisions. And I think now, especially with housing prices as high as they are, there's a lot of young people that kind of feel like they can't really do a lot of the family formation stuff that maybe their parents or grandparents were able to do. And I know there's a lot of older people out there that are sitting on probably much more wealth than they'll ever need. And so is there ways that they can give and help out and help their younger ones? And actually, I think there's already some data this is happening. I remember, I don't know if this is true, I heard something that was like, they say 50% of like Gen Z and millennials are getting some form of financial help from their parents, which is like kind of seems like a lot, but like I think that number might even go up because it's tough, right? And there's people that have these homes that they bought for much, very cheap price a long time ago. Now a lot of these homes are, easily very high six figures, and it's like, my grandparents bought their house for $27,000. It's now worth like $750. It's like, obviously it was like the 1970s, a long time ago, but it goes to show just how much wealth is being created, and it's not necessarily being equally distributed. And so I'm trying to like push those people like, hey, you have a lot of wealth, give something to help out your children, your children's children, etc. So that's kind of the thinking behind it. I know it's not really as relevant to this audience, but I think it's something to think about. And if you have someone, like, send them the article, see what they say. I know it's tough to have those conversations, but I think you don't want to get a big check at 50. No one wants that. Like, of course, like I'd rather get a much smaller check now and not get anything at 50 than like, okay, like, it just, no one wants that. No one wants that money then. They'd rather have it now, and I think you can make much more of an impact. So that's kind of a big thing I've been talking about.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually really relevant to my audience, because I mean, Bill Perkins, who was also on the podcast and with Die with Zero, he talks about that in his book too, is that, with that experience or that thing, especially with your children, been more beneficial, right, when they needed it in their building wealth stage. So I totally agree with you, and yeah, your numbers are like might be bigger for some people depending on like where they are in life, but even if you broke that down to smaller like numbers, and like how you said, the utility of money kind of changes based on like how much you have, and so like even if you have less, and can give less, I think, as long as it's not like detrimental to you. So that's one thing I try to tell parents, is that, who come and say, oh, I want to invest for my kids, and I get it, but like, are you okay? Right? Like, I think the best financial gift you can give your children is for them not to have to worry about you when they become adults and start making money. But after that, and what are the ways in which you can give back to your children as they're building wealth to help them, because it's going to be more beneficial, like depending on your age, that they get this money in their 30s or 20s versus like when they're 60 or 70 and you're like, leaving the earth, God willing, later in life.
Yeah. I also think the other thing too is like, I'm telling the people who are giving the money away, like the grandparents of the world, be a little selfish and make it a memory. Go, instead of just giving them a check for $5,000, $10,000, whatever it is, go take the family on a family vacation while you're still alive versus waiting. Okay, you die, now they get a bigger check. What do you think would have been better for you and for them? Is like, you got a better memory with them. Take them on a vacation somewhere, right? Spend a little bit of money on that. I think that's a far better way to do it. Of course, you can help with education expenses. You can help with, housing, like helping with the down payment. Like, there's all sorts of ways this can be done. I think the most memorable and the most impactful things is obviously creating those memories, having shared, vacation, whatever that is. I prefer that, and I think it's the easiest thing to pitch people on. It's like, yeah, wouldn't you rather do that now, or would you rather just like, do you want to just accumulate more money and then just pass it on? Like, there's nothing fun about that. No one's going to be happy when that happens, obviously. Like, yes, getting money is great, but no one wants to lose a loved one, right? It's much better to spend some of that down and just enjoy that time and enjoy that you work so hard for that money. You might as well do something with it. So that's my only take. And people are like, well, what about medical costs? Like, yes, that's a risk, but at the end of the day, there's Medicaid. So it's like, trust me, it's not perfect, but there's a lot of people on Medicaid and they're getting decent care. And like, of course, is it as good as the absolute best care out there? No, but it's still something. And like, we're all going to die eventually. So it's like, you got to think about what you really value. Do you want to just have the best medical care when you're 90, or do you want to like have a much better like memory of your children or your grandchildren when you're 70, right? It's like, that's the type of thinking you have to do when you go through this.
Nick, this conversation has been delightful. Can you please tell people where they can get your book, follow more of your work, and just keep in touch with you?
Yeah, my books, everywhere books are sold, Amazon, you can find it. You can also just go to wealthladderbook.com. You can see all the stuff there, read about it, etc. And then you can find me on X. I'm at Dollars and Data. You can find me on Instagram, Nick Maggiulli. I bet we'll have links in the show notes or whatever. So yeah, anything like that. And once again, feel free to DM me. I try to respond to every single DM. As long as it's not absolutely unhinged, I promise I will respond to you.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of people probably will, So glad you gave that disclaimer. But no, thank you so much for coming on the show. Super insightful, and this was helpful. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it. Thank you.